Hello, hello. This is Metal Clay Madness, or Beginner's Metal Clay, here at the Metal Arts Guild of Georgia. My name is Kate Larrabee, and I am teaching the beginning class. We have students who are currently working on this project in the background, so if somebody happens to walk through, they are a student who is actively working on the project that I am going to demo here for you today. So the project that we're working on is rolling out a ring band out of metal clay. So I've got about 10 grams of clay that I've opened up, and I'm waking it up a little. So the ring bands that we're making, I generally roll them out. 3 cards is the thinnest that I would make them. Because I'm gonna do a pattern on top, you can add a couple of cards to accommodate for that. So I'm going to go ahead and roll out my clay to 4 cards thick since my pattern is relatively thin. I'm going to make sure that all of my surfaces are well lubricated with Badger Balm. I'm just going to use my fingers. I'm just going to make sure that my mold is well lubricated. Oh, and the last thing I'm going to lubricate is our roller. This is just a PVC pipe. I think it's probably 1.5 inch PVC pipe. So because we are rolling out a ring band, I want to roll this out longwise. So I'm going to start close to my body. I'm going to roll from fingertip to the heel of the palm. And I'm going to try and do this in one roll without having to re-roll it. So I've got this nice linear shape. Because I've had to touch it a bit, I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of moisture back to the clay. With this kind of clay, we only use distilled water, not tap, because distilled water has minerals in it that will disturb the chemical compounds of your clay, and that will make it hard when it fires, for it to fire correctly. So I'm adding a little bit of moisture back. I'm gonna let that sit for a second. So now that we've rolled to a greater thickness to accommodate for our mold, I'm gonna transfer my clay manually by hand onto the mold. And this mold has been used a few times, so it's got a little bit of movement to it, but that's okay. I ultimately want this band to be 3 cards thick. That seems to be a comfortable wearable thickness. So I'm going to support my slats on either side. And again, I'm going to roll from fingertip to heel of palm. I'm going to try and make this in one go. Nice. So transfer this back to my plastic sheet. This is a non-porous plastic sheet. You can buy these at the Dollar Tree. They are originally marketed as dividers for elementary school children's binders, but they're perfect for this. So now that I've got my clay rolled out, I want to know what length it needs to be cut to wrap on our little mandrel. So I'm actually using a silicone plug. When you're rolling out a ring, the size that you want the ring to end up, you need to add 1.5 to 2.5 sizes, depending on the thickness of your band. General rule of thumb is 2 sizes. So I know that I want my ring to be about a 9. So I've got a 9.5. So I've got an 11.5 size plug, and I'll pop it onto this bezel mandrel. Because this silicone plug is non-porous, I don't need to wrap it with anything. I don't need to use anything but just a wee bit, the very thinnest layer of release agent. And because I've popped it on the back of this mandrel, it's a little out of shape, but that's okay. This will still help it dry much more evenly than it would have otherwise. But you can also just use a strip of paper towel. And I'm gonna take whatever the size is, whether you're using a graduated mandrel or one of these pellets. You find the size and then add maybe 1/2 inch to that size. I like to add that extra 1/2 inch because when you're wrapping it onto the pellet or onto the mandrel, you're gonna want a little bit of extra to help keep it on the mandrel while you're cutting it to size. So I've got my relative size. To help me create a more linear shape, I'm actually gonna take one of my slats and use it to create a nice flat edge on either side. Nice. Soybean. And then I'm going to use, you can either use an X-Acto knife or you can use a metal scribe. I like to use an X-Acto knife myself. I'm going to cut it relatively to size. And then the clay that's not being used actively in this moment is going to go into my clay hydrator, which is essentially just a glass jar with a couple of sponges full of distilled water. And here we go. So now that I've got the band relative to the size that I want, I'm just going to manually pop it onto your mandrel or your pellet. I like to pop it on the middle first so that it drapes, and then you can give it a roll. This way you can make sure that it rolls on kind of evenly. And here at the place where the 2 layers overlap, you can then cut somewhere in the middle. So I wouldn't cut directly where one piece ends because you want it to be nice and even when it joins. So I'm going to come about halfway, and I'm going to cut at about a 45-degree angle. It doesn't have to be exact, but having that angle helps match up the 2 ends. So I'm just going to cut straight down. Using these little silicone pellets, you want to be careful not to cut through the pellet. But I'm going to take the little bit of clay that was on top, unroll just a little to remove the clay that was underneath. And now the 2 edges of my ring are meeting. So let me put away this excess clay. And then I'm going to use a combination of distilled water and syringe to create a really strong seam. So I can see that right here is the seam in my ring. I'm going to take a flat brush and get it just ever so slightly wet. There's my skin. And I'm going to take the edge that is the thickest, and I'm going to drag it very gently across into the edge that's a little bit thinner. If they're perfectly even, which kudos to you, if it's perfectly even, then you can just pick